The year 2000 was an absolute bloodbath for Hollywood. Studios collectively lost over $1.5 billion on a parade of disasters, vanity projects, and films so troubled that directors demanded their names be removed. I've got John Travolta bombing twice in one year. I've got Robert De Niro publicly admitting he made a movie solely for the money. And there's a screenwriter who only got the job because he walked into a Scientology center to pick up women. Which disaster lost the most? It's not the one you'd expect. Let's find out. Supernova is the movie that needed 5 directors and still failed. Walter Hill, the guy who made The Warriors and 48 Hours, took this sci-fi project for MGM with just 2 months to prepare. The studio gave him a $70 million budget, then slashed it mid-production, eliminating a cutting-edge robot character and a zero-gravity water rescue. You'd think that's bad enough. It gets worse. Hill quit and demanded his name be removed. Jack Shoulder came in for reshoots, then Francis Ford Coppola, yes, the Godfather director, supervised yet another re-edit. When Coppola wanted to establish a romance earlier in the film but couldn't reshoot, he took a love scene with 2 actors and digitally placed different actors' faces onto their bodies. This actually happened. The result? $14.8 million worldwide against that $70 million budget. That's a loss of around $160 million when you factor in marketing. Rotten Tomatoes gave it 11%. When Hill petitioned to remove his name, the traditional pseudonym Alan Smithy had just been retired. Thomas Lee became the first ever replacement pseudonym approved by the Directors Guild. Supernova is literally a footnote in directorial disowning history. Nobody has tried to rehabilitate this one. It's just gone. Kim Basinger won an Oscar for L.A. Confidential in 1997. 3 years later, she was earning Razzie nominations. Bless the Child was her second bomb of 2000, arriving just 3 months after I Dreamed of Africa tanked. Paramount gave this religious horror film a $40 million budget during a wave of similar movies. End of Days, Stigmata, Lost Souls, The Ninth Gate. By the time Bless the Child arrived in August, audiences were completely saturated. It made $40.4 million worldwide, which sounds like it broke even until you remember marketing costs. The studio was staring at nearly $60 million in losses. Critics weren't kind either. 4% on Rotten Tomatoes. The Washington Post called it so bad that the scariest thing about this hokey bombast is that it got made in the first place. Basinger went from Oscar winner to Razzie nominee in 3 years. That's a Hollywood cautionary tale if I've ever seen one. John Travolta had already released Battlefield Earth 5 months earlier. Lucky Numbers was his second catastrophic bomb of 2000, and somehow it performed even worse relative to its budget. Paramount spent $65 million on this dark comedy about a lottery scandal. It made $10.9 million worldwide. That's a ratio of 0.17, the worst budget to gross ratio of any film that year. Here's the thing, this was directed by Nora Ephron. Sleepless in Seattle, Nora Ephron. You've Got Mail, Nora Ephron. But this was the only film she directed without also writing the screenplay, and she was completely mismatched with the dark material. CinemaScore gave it an F, one of only 4 films in 2000 to receive that grade. Roger Ebert's review ended with this line, "Travolta survived this experience with his sense of humor still intact. How can I be sure? He has announced he wants to make a sequel to Battlefield Earth." The toxic stench from that earlier disaster made audiences allergic to another Travolta film. Lucky Numbers never had a chance. William Friedkin directed The French Connection and The Exorcist. Tommy Lee Jones and Samuel L. Jackson starred. Paramount gave them $70 million. You'd think this was a safe bet. It made $71.7 million worldwide, which Friedkin himself called a box office hit. But here's the math studios use. A film needs roughly 2.5 times its budget to break even after marketing and theater splits. Rules of Engagement fell well short, losing an estimated $103 million. It also became one of the most controversial films of the year for its portrayal of Arab characters. Scholar Jack Shaheen called it the most blatantly racist movie he'd encountered. The audience actually liked it. CinemaScore was a minus, but weak international performance and critical backlash made this a borderline bomb that nobody wanted to claim. Friedkin still insists it was a hit. The accountants disagree. Here's the biggest financial loss of 2000, and it's not Battlefield Earth. Red Planet cost Warner Brothers $80 million and made $33.5 million worldwide. That's an estimated loss of $166.5 million. The production was plagued by one of the most legendary feuds in Hollywood history. Val Kilmer and Tom Sizemore were friends before filming. Then Kilmer discovered the production had paid to ship Sizemore's exercise machine from England to Australia. Kilmer erupted, "I'm making $10 million on this. You're only making $2 million." Sizemore responded by throwing a 50-pound weight at him. From that point, they refused to speak or come onto set if the other was present. Body doubles had to complete scenes involving both actors. A producer allegedly asked Sizemore not to punch Kilmer in the face, so Sizemore punched him in the chest hard enough to knock him down instead. Red Planet was one of 2 Mars movies that bombed in 2000. Mission to Mars had arrived 8 months earlier. By November, audiences had complete Mars fatigue. Director Anthony Hoffman never made another feature film. His entire theatrical career is this one bomb. This is the strangest entry on the list. 13 Days has an 83% on Rotten Tomatoes. Critics praised it as a gripping thriller about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it still lost over $133 million. The problem was Kevin Costner. After Waterworld and The Postman, audiences simply would not turn out for another Costner historical drama. The film cost $80 million and made $66.6 million worldwide. George W. Bush screened it at the White House and invited Ted Kennedy. Costner offered to screen it for U.S. soldiers at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. The military rejected the offer because they were unhappy with the film's portrayal of Pentagon figures. Robert McNamara publicly criticized it too. For God's sakes, Kenny O'Donnell didn't have any role whatsoever in the missile crisis. 13 Days proves that good reviews mean nothing if your star is box office poison. Here's where it gets interesting. Reindeer Games is a Christmas heist movie that was released in February. John Frankenheimer, the director of The Manchurian Candidate, made a film about Santas robbing a casino. Dimension Films gave him $42 million. The Weinsteins' interference caused endless reshoots and re-editing, pushing the release from Christmas 1999 to late February 2000. A Christmas movie. In February, it made $32.2 million worldwide against that $42 million budget. Estimated loss, $72.8 million. In the UK, they retitled it Deception and sent it straight to DVD. Charlize Theron told Esquire in 2007, "That was a bad movie, but I got to work with John Frankenheimer." She called it her least favorite of all her films. This was Frankenheimer's final theatrical feature. The man who directed one of the great American thrillers ended his career on a Ben Affleck Christmas heist movie released in February. He passed away in July 2002. Robert De Niro publicly admitted he made this movie solely for the money. The irony, his own production company co-produced it. Universal spent $76 million on a live-action and animation hybrid starring De Niro, Jason Alexander, and Rene Russo. It made $35.1 million worldwide. Estimated loss, $154.9 million. The script was written by Kenneth Lonergan. That same year, Lonergan received an Oscar nomination for You Can Count on Me. He would later win an Oscar for Manchester by the Sea. One of America's most acclaimed writers penned a cartoon adaptation that earned a fraction of its budget. Rocky and Bullwinkle went straight to video in Germany, despite being financed with German money. It was part of Universal's long string of failed TV to movie adaptations. Flipper, Sergeant Bilko, Leave It to Beaver, McHale's Navy. Hollywood just kept trying. Audiences just kept staying home. Disney built a $4 million temporary IMAX theater in Los Angeles, specifically for Fantasia 2000, then demolished it after the engagement ended. That's how committed Roy E. Disney was to his passion project. CEO Michael Eisner called it Roy Disney's Folly, echoing the phrase critics had used for Walt's original in 1940. The film cost $85 million and made $90.9 million worldwide. Sounds close to break even until you factor in that demolished theater, the aggressive IMAX rollout, and marketing. Estimated loss, $121.6 million. The wide release opened to just $2.8 million, landing at number 11 at the box office. Here's a detail almost nobody knows. In early development, the sequel was conceived as an orchestration of Beatles songs. That idea was scrapped, and Disney deliberately scheduled the wide release on June 16th, the exact same date as Titan AE, to sabotage the competition. Disney had done the same thing to Don Bluth's Anastasia years earlier. Ruthless. In 1990, a teenage D&D fan from Toronto contacted the game's publisher pretending to work on a school economics project. He spent 18 months convincing them to negotiate and secured an option for just $15,000. His original vision was the Star Wars of the fantasy genre with a $100 million budget. That teenager was Courtney Solomon. By 2000, legal battles had destroyed the timeline, and Solomon was forced to direct Dungeons & Dragons himself when no experienced filmmaker would take the job. The budget was $36 million, but only $21 million was available during production. Actors used real swords for fight scenes because they couldn't afford props. Jeremy Irons was asked why he appeared in the film. His answer, "I just bought a castle. I had to pay for it somehow." He'd purchased a 15th century castle in Ireland. His performance is legendarily over the top. The film made $33.8 million worldwide against that $36 million budget, 10% on Rotten Tomatoes. The toxic reputation kept Hollywood away from D&D for 23 years until Honor Among Thieves finally proved the property could work. This is the bomb that killed an entire animation studio in 10 days. Don Bluth and Gary Goldman directed Titan AE for Fox Animation Studios. The budget reached somewhere between $75 and $90 million, including $30 million wasted in early development under a different director. It made $36.8 million worldwide. Fox executive Chris Meledandri stated the film lost Fox $100 million. Fox Animation Studios was shut down on June 26, 2000. Exactly 10 days after the film's release. Bill Mechanic, the Fox chairman, was fired. Don Bluth has never directed another theatrical film in the 25 years since. The man behind The Secret of NIMH, An American Tale, and The Land Before Time saw his career permanently ended. Here's the ironic twist. Blue Sky Studios, which animated one scene in Titan AE, became Fox's replacement animation studio and made billions with the Ice Age franchise. Chris Meledandri, the executive who oversaw this disaster, later founded Illumination Entertainment. Despicable Me Minions. Failure bred extraordinary success for everyone except the people who made the film. Arnold Schwarzenegger earned 3 Razzie nominations for The Sixth Day. 1 for Worst Actor as the original character, 1 for Worst Supporting Actor as the clone, and 1 for Worst Screen Couple, Schwarzenegger and Schwarzenegger. He lost all 3 to Battlefield Earth. Columbia Pictures spent $82 million on this cloning thriller. Schwarzenegger's salary alone was $25 million, nearly a third of the entire budget. The film made $96.1 million worldwide, which sounds decent until you realize the break-even point was over $200 million. Estimated loss, $108.9 million. This was Schwarzenegger's dramatic career decline. After Batman and Robin, heart surgery, and the reviled End of Days, this was supposed to re-establish him. Instead, it accelerated his exit from Hollywood. 2 years later, after another bomb, he abandoned acting entirely to become governor of California. The film does have one distinction. It features the film debut of Terry Crews, who played an assassin named Vincent. From this forgotten Schwarzenegger bomb, Crews built an entire career. Kevin Spacey had just won an Oscar for American Beauty. Helen Hunt had won for As Good as It Gets. Haley Joel Osment was fresh off his Sixth Sense nomination. Warner Brothers assembled this trio for what was expected to be a prestige picture. Critics called it the stickiest pile of moosh since Patch Adams. Pay It Forward cost $40 million and made $55.7 million worldwide. Estimated loss, $44.3 million. The controversial ending polarized audiences and derailed any awards momentum. Screenwriter Leslie Dixon walked away from the project, later saying the star's script changes represented death by 1,000 little razor cuts. Director Mimi Leder later admitted, "Pay It Forward was not a box office success, and I went to movie jail for quite a long time." She became a textbook example of how Hollywood treated female directors differently. One flop meant exile. Male directors survived far worse routinely. But here's the thing. The phrase "pay it forward" entered mainstream English vernacular. It became a genuine social movement, arguably the most culturally influential bomb on this entire list. Brian De Palma directed Scarface, The Untouchables, and The First Mission. Impossible. Disney gave him $100 million for Mission to Mars, the highest budget of any film on this list. It made $111 million worldwide. Estimated loss, $139 million. Gore Verbinski was originally attached to direct. He walked away over creative disputes with Disney. 3 years later, Verbinski directed Pirates of the Caribbean for the same studio. That worked out. De Palma found working with visual effects deeply frustrating. He later admitted he didn't have the money to make the shots as spectacular as they needed to be. The alien climax was widely mocked. This was the last studio film Brian De Palma ever directed. He cited the VFX process as the reason he quit the Hollywood system entirely. The man who made some of the greatest thrillers in American cinema walked away forever after this experience. European critics disagreed with the American reception. Cahiers du Cinéma ranked it the 4th best film of the year. Sometimes the French just see things differently. John Travolta wanted to adapt L. Ron Hubbard's novel since the 1980s, when Hubbard personally sent him a signed copy. After Pulp Fiction revitalized his career, Travolta used his clout to push the project. 3 major studios passed. Travolta reportedly offered the directing job to Quentin Tarantino. He declined. Enter Franchise Pictures, a company that rescued stars' passion projects. They packaged Battlefield Earth with financing from a German distributor. The reported budget was $73 million. The actual budget was $44 million. Franchise Pictures had fraudulently inflated the numbers by $31 million to extract more money from investors. An FBI investigation uncovered the fraud. The German company sued and won a $121.7 million judgment, bankrupting Franchise Pictures. The film made $29.7 million worldwide, 3% on Rotten Tomatoes. Metacritic, 9 out of 100. It won 9 Razzies total, holding the all-time record until Jack and Jill. But here's my favorite detail. Screenwriter J.D. Shapiro wrote a public apology in the New York Post in 2010. He revealed he got the job because he walked into a Scientology celebrity center to pick up women. On trying to use the film for dating purposes, no way do you get any action by boldly going up to a woman and proclaiming, "I wrote Battlefield Earth." If anything, I'm trying to figure out a way to bottle it and use it as birth control. Travolta called the film the Schindler's List of science fiction. He said this multiple times, unironically. At a post-launch press event, he asked assembled journalists if they'd enjoyed it. He received dead silence. The year 2000 taught Hollywood a simple lesson that it keeps forgetting. Passion projects backed by delusional stars and questionable financing are disasters waiting to happen. Combined losses across these 15 films exceeded $1.8 billion in break-even terms. 4 films received CinemaScore grades of F. 2 Mars movies alone cost studios $180 million in production. Red Planet holds the record for biggest single loss at $166.5 million. But Battlefield Earth holds the record for cultural infamy. 25 years later, people still reference it as shorthand for career-destroying vanity project. Travolta never recovered. Don Bluth never recovered. Brian De Palma left the studio system forever. The millennium didn't start with hope for these filmmakers. It started with humiliation, and Hollywood, as always, learned absolutely nothing.